All right, so our group's candidates for Mount Rushmore are a group of inventors and innovators. My two people are the Wright brothers who invented the airplane.
My person was Joseph Giddlin, who created the barbed wire.
My person was J.P. Morgan, who created J.P. Morgan Bank.
My person was Eli Whitney, the creator of the cotton gin.
And my person was Anna Baldwin, the creator of the milk suction machine.
All right, so some common things that they all had were the fact that they were that they were innovators and stuff like that. They created certain things that progressed their respective fields. J.P. Morgan with the banking, both Eli Whitney, Joseph Dillon, with innovations that helped out their certain eras. When it comes to the Wright brothers, just making such a influential transportation machine, and Anna Baldwin with the invention of the milk sucking machine, helping produce milk and stuff like that for fellow Americans and stuff like that. They all impacted the economy as well, and they just had a lot of impact as innovators.
Yeah, and they all didn't really share like common issues among each other, even though they were all innovators and inventors. They all kind of had different issues within their own respective fields. Like J.P. Morgan had an issue with like the American populace supporting him or not, and well, Eli Whitney didn't really have that issue. He had the issue of the morality of his machine, and probably just creating it itself.
And also, the process of inventing in it of itself is difficult. The process of making a name for yourself and becoming trustworthy enough, especially maybe not in the case of J.P. Morgan, who already had, I believe his family was a family of bankers, and he didn't really have a problem establishing himself as a monopoly in banking. But for the inventors in this group, getting that level of credibility is a difficulty that like persists today in inventing.
And that goes for all inventions too.
So going into who we think should and shouldn't be on Mount Rushmore, I guess we're starting off with you, Amanda.
So I think Anna Baldwin should not be on Mount Rushmore because although her invention was significant and important to the economy, it wasn't as important as any other invention might have been. And it made a contribution to the economy, but I think there was more important things.
So following the same point as Amanda pointed out, Joseph Gilden, also an inventor, we also felt he just was not influential enough to reach the Mount Rushmore status that most other candidates who are already on there have. He might have been influential with his invention or his innovation of the barbed wire, but just to be on Mount Rushmore, I don't think he qualifies enough, even if he didn't have that massive amount of impact in the westward expansion of America.
Yeah, and J.P. Morgan kind of follows suit. I would say he's a little bit more influential than Joseph because of how popular his banking was and how wealthy he was. He was able to influence politics, the people, have a lot of philanthropy. But I don't think he is Mount Rushmore worthy because of some of his negative sides, with him being one of the major robber barons within the era, with him partnering with Carnegie Steel. During the Civil War, he sold defective weapons to both sides, injuring many soldiers in the process. So he wasn't a great guy, even though he did do some philanthropy. He's not really what we want on Mount Rushmore.
So going into who we think would be a good candidate for Mount Rushmore, I say the Wright brothers, out of all of the people we've listed, would probably be the best candidate just because their invention of the airplane was something that still impacts us today. During the time, it was revolutionary. They toured Europe and people loved them there. They influenced warfare in World War I and following wars. And even today, it's one of the major modes of transportation, not only of people, but of cargo. And overall, I think it's just an invention that without it, life would look incredibly different. And it just massively impact not only our country, but the world. But going on to somebody who we haven't talked about yet, Jack, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, so our other possible candidate for a spot on Mount Rushmore is Eli Whitney, who obviously invented the cotton gin and greatly impacted the economy of the South and the future of the South, as slavery was on a bit of a decline in the South prior to his invention, and the cotton gin really just brought it back into the spotlight as such a major a cornerstone of the economy. So really, without that invention, you have to think that just the development of the country as a whole would have been very, very different. But there are other reasons that sort of keep him out of Mount Rushmore territory. The expansion of slavery into the West as the Louisiana Purchase takes place very shortly after the invention of the cotton gin, 1794 into
03, I think.
03, yeah. 1803. That's not a very long time in between those two inventions. So with slavery being back on the uptick right after the invention of the cotton gin, it really did incentivize westward expansion and for slave labor to be used in the newly expanded West because of just how efficient it was now that cotton could be produced so much faster and it requiring less labor overall, but being able to create more of it with bigger plantations with more land to make those plantations on just expanded the entire field of slavery exponentially.
Yeah, so basically, this goes into our last point about why, even though, I was talking about the Wright brothers and how I think they're the best candidate out of this bunch, but we don't really feel that anybody is concretely Mount Rushmore worthy in this group, and what we kind of as a group think it means to be Mount Rushmore worthy. You can't deny, despite the many negative impacts of his invention, Eli Whitney had a substantial effect on the economy of America. But to be put on Mount Rushmore, I think should be more substantial than having an effect on the economy or making an invention that would provide ease of transportation or ease of production. I think it's something that should massively impact the everyday lives of Americans. Like, you look at the current Mount Rushmore. Abraham Lincoln literally abolished slavery in America. Thomas Jefferson, although we did say he has his negatives since he was a slaveholder, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. George Washington was our very first president, and Theodore Roosevelt, his regulations in working made basically the livelihoods of Americans across the country better. So that's why none of us are very, I guess you could say, confident in putting our people out there, because although they had these massive impacts, Mount Rushmore is such a high esteem that I think is very hard to meet, and it should be looked at very critically, in my opinion, because you're immortalizing these people. You're putting these people on a mountain forever. So,
Yeah.
Does anybody have any comments?
Okay, so I agree with what Tess was just saying, because I feel like none of the inventors on our list, none of them affected like the country fully enough to be recognized on Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, so kind of like you could look at those people on Mount Rushmore, like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. Their legacies will always be kind of remembered, but people like Eli Whitney, and maybe Joseph Gideon might be kind of cast aside because yes, they did have an important invention. It's not as impactful as those four presidents that are on Mount Rushmore already.
Yeah, and when it comes to their influence, their influence mostly comes into almost like an era standpoint. At this era they came into, or they had their influence at that time. But when it comes to someone on Mount Rushmore, we're talking about someone who has lasting effects, like Washington with his farewell address, and Thomas Jefferson with the Declaration of Independence, and then Theodore Roosevelt with his Roosevelt Quarterly, and then just how they're also just like that. Those documents and things were influential for most of America, period, being some of their founding stones and stuff like that. So
a lot of it is also about like the lasting impact they've had on America. Washington's farewell address was still something that future presidents were looking back to and using as this sort of like, this is what we should do for a while, except for political parties. But obviously Lincoln ending slavery was just such a massive step for America, changing the economy almost entirely from the ground up. the South was such a rich section of America, and their way of making money wasn't a thing they could do anymore, and industrialization really took over. And Thomas Jefferson expanding the country and writing the Declaration of Independence and things like the Bill of Rights, and Theodore Roosevelt and his reform movements that like just changed the country as a whole for everyone. All of those things had very lasting, long-lasting, widespread impacts that I don't think any of these inventions really level out to.
Yeah, and I gotta say, when you think of America, you think of the guys we've been talking about. You think of George Washington, you think of Thomas Jefferson, and even, I know with our personal Mount Rushmore, when you think of America, I think maybe you should think of Judith Sargent Murray and her impact on women and how she spoke up for women's rights in a time where it was practically unheard of. I don't think any of these people should come to mind when you think of America. I think Mount Rushmore should stand for what we've done in the past and what we strive to do in the future. And although these people had such massive impacts, I don't think that they should be put on this monument where it's basically us displaying, these are our models, these are the people who are representing our country, basically. So, yeah, I think that's about all I have to say. Does anybody have any other last comments? No? Alright, so I guess we're signing off.